The phone rang just as the afternoon light stretched across my hospital bed, warm and golden against the pale walls. My hip still throbbed from surgery, painkillers fogging my mind, but her voice cut through it, sharp, cold, final. I remember staring at the half-eaten pudding on my tray, realizing it wasn't the pain that hurt most anymore. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from, because sometimes the deepest wounds aren't on the body, they're in the heart. That was the moment I understood that love, when unreturned, can turn into something else entirely, something stronger, something that doesn't break. Let me show you how it all began. It was a quiet afternoon, sometime around 2:30 p.m., when the phone rang beside my hospital bed. My hip still ached from surgery, a dull throb pulsing through the haze of pain medication. The smell of antiseptic clung to the air, and sunlight cut in thin lines through the blinds, dust drifting in the beam like time refusing to move. I reached for the phone, slow and clumsy, careful not to twist my leg. That call, I can still hear it in my head. The tone wasn't cruel, just cold, detached, like I was an afterthought in my own family's life. My daughter-in-law's voice carried no warmth, only efficiency. She said what needed to be said, that I shouldn't expect too much, that she and my son were busy, that it might be better if I rested alone for a while. Then the line went quiet, leaving only the hum of machines beside me. For a long moment, I just sat there holding the phone, my fingers trembling against the plastic. I wasn't angry, not yet. Mostly, I felt small, invisible, like an old piece of furniture someone once loved but no longer needed. I tried to swallow the feeling down, but it lingered, sharp, bitter, unforgettable. The nurse walked in soon after, adjusting my pillows, asking if I needed more water. I smiled and told her I was fine. That's what we do, isn't it? We pretend to be fine, even when our hearts feel bruised. But as the minutes passed, something shifted in me. Underneath the pain and humiliation, a quiet voice whispered, "This isn't how your story ends." I didn't know it then, but that call lit a small spark inside me. A part of me that had been quiet for years began to stir. The part that once fought for her family, her dignity, her purpose. Maybe they saw an old, fragile woman, but I was more than that. I still am. And as I lay back against the pillow, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, I realized this moment, this sting of being dismissed, wasn't an ending at all. It was the beginning of something I never expected. When I think back on the life I've lived, it feels like a long chain of caregiving, one person's needs after another, all stitched together by duty and love. Before my hip gave out, I spent more than 30 years working as a nurse at the county hospital. I held the hands of strangers as they slipped between life and death. I learned to steady my voice in the middle of chaos, to be calm when others broke apart. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. I believed that if I poured enough care into the world, it would one day come back to me. When my husband passed away, that belief was tested. Losing him was like losing the rhythm of my life. He was steady, quiet, a man who never let me lift the heavy things alone, in the house or in my heart. After he was gone, I tried to fill the silence with work and family. My son, David, had already married by then. His wife, Melissa, was polished and ambitious, the kind of woman who measured worth by appearances. I never quite fit her world. To her, I wasn't mom. I was an accessory, someone to help, to babysit, to tidy up when things got messy. For years, I told myself it was fine. That's what mothers do, right? We give, and we give, and we hope it's enough. But lately, I've realized that kindness without boundaries only teaches others how to use you. And that truth, it hurts. Now, sitting here in my small house that still smells faintly of antiseptic from my recovery, I feel the weight of every year I spent putting others first. The floors creak under my cane, the air hums with quiet, and for the first time, I'm learning to listen to my own thoughts. There's strength in that silence, something I didn't expect. And though I don't know it yet, this quiet chapter won't last long. Soon, a knock at the door will change everything I thought I understood about family, love, and what I'm truly capable of. The house was quiet that morning, too quiet. I had just managed to sit down with a cup of tea, my cane resting against the arm of the chair, when the doorbell cut through the silence like an alarm. The sound startled me. My heart gave a little jump. It wasn't a visitor kind of day. I was still healing, still learning how to walk without wincing. It took me longer than I'd like to reach the door. Every step felt deliberate, my hip reminding me of its fragility. When I finally turned the handle, the cold air rushed in, stinging my face. And there they were, my grandchildren. Two small figures, standing awkwardly on the porch, clutching worn-out backpacks that looked heavier than they should. Their clothes were mismatched, their shoes caked with dirt. My granddaughter's hair was tangled, and my grandson's eyes were red, not from crying just then, but from having cried too often. Behind them, I caught a glimpse of their mother, Melissa, in her car. She barely met my eyes. Her smile was forced, the kind you give when you've already decided you're done pretending. She muttered something about needing a few days. Then she was gone, tires crunching over gravel, the car disappearing before I could even process what had just happened. The silence she left behind was deafening. I looked at the children again, really looked. Their cheeks were pale, their eyes hollow in a way no child's should be. When I asked if they'd eaten, they just looked down. The youngest clutched his sister's sleeve like a shield. That's when the truth settled over me like a heavy blanket. This wasn't a visit. This was a drop-off, a handoff, maybe even an escape. Something in me broke open in that moment. The weakness I'd been drowning in since my surgery. It evaporated. In its place was something fierce and unyielding. These weren't just my son's children. They were mine to protect now. As I guided them inside, the house no longer smelled of antiseptic and loneliness. It smelled of purpose. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew one thing for sure. This week would change everything. For them, and for me. The first morning after they arrived, the house felt different. The air held a strange mix of life and sorrow. The sound of small footsteps on the hardwood floor, the faint rustle of blankets, the nervous hush of children trying not to disturb. I moved slowly through the kitchen, my hips still stiff, but my hands steady. Years of nursing had taught me that care begins with small things: warmth, food, gentleness. I scrambled eggs, buttered toast, and poured milk into mismatched glasses. When I called the children to eat, they hesitated, standing by the doorway as if waiting for permission. That hesitation broke my heart. When they finally sat down, they ate quietly, almost mechanically, glancing at me as if afraid I might take the food away. My granddaughter whispered a thank you so soft I almost didn't hear it. My grandson's hands shook when he reached for a second slice of toast. That's when I noticed the details, the shadows under their eyes, the bruises that didn't look new, the smell of clothes that hadn't been washed in far too long. Their nails were chipped, their hair dull. My nurse's mind started connecting dots faster than I wanted it to. Malnutrition, poor hygiene, anxiety responses. These weren't just the marks of busy parents. This was sustained neglect. Later that afternoon, I sat by the window as they played in the yard. They didn't laugh much. Their games were cautious, quiet, as if joy had rules. When a car drove by and honked, the boy flinched so hard he nearly tripped. I wanted to run out and hold him, but I stayed still, letting them have their fragile moment of freedom. Inside, anger and sorrow tangled together. I thought about all the times I'd defended Melissa, telling myself she was just overwhelmed. But no, this wasn't about being overwhelmed. This was about disregard. These children weren't being raised, they were being endured. That night, as I tucked them into the guest bed, they thanked me again for dinner, for clean sheets, for leaving a light on in the hallway. Such simple things, and yet they treated them like treasures. My chest ached with both love and fury. No child should be this grateful just to feel safe. When the house finally went quiet, I sat alone in the dim kitchen. The smell of dish soap and cooling tea hung in the air. My reflections stared back from the window. Tired. Yes, but not defeated. That old part of me, the nurse, the mother, the protector, had fully awakened. This wasn't just about helping anymore. This was about saving them. And as I switched off the light, I made a promise I didn't speak aloud. I would find out the truth. I would not let them go back. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with only the soft hum of the refrigerator for company. The house was dim, and the glow from the hallway light stretched across the floor like a quiet promise. My hands were still trembling, part exhaustion, part fury, but my mind was clearer than it had been in months. I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. I couldn't unknow what I knew. And I realized, sitting there in that silence, that doing nothing was no longer an option. For most of my life, I'd believed my power came from being kind, patient, and dependable. But kindness alone wouldn't protect these children. What they needed now was strategy. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that works in whispers and careful steps. I took out my old notebook, the one I used to keep during my nursing years, and began to write observations, dates, behaviors, everything I'd noticed since the moment they arrived. Their weight, their bruises, their hesitation when food was offered. It felt mechanical at first, but that habit of documentation had never really left me. It was how I used to save lives, through details, consistency, evidence. I thought about who I could trust. Nancy, my neighbor, had seen Melissa's car speeding away that morning. She'd always had a sharp eye and a good heart. Then there was Carol, an old colleague, a retired social worker who'd spent decades in child welfare. I could still hear her voice in my memory, calm but unyielding, always reminding me that protecting the innocent sometimes meant standing up to those closest to you. The next morning, I made my calls. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would raise suspicion. Just quiet check-ins, gentle questions, a conversation over the fence. By evening, I already had the first small piece of support forming around me, a network woven out of friendship, experience, and purpose. As I hung up the phone, I looked toward the living room where my grandchildren slept on the pull-out couch. Their little faces were soft in the glow of the nightlight, finally peaceful. My hip ached, my body tired easily, but I felt something new stirring inside me. Strength, calm, and a kind of righteous fire I hadn't known I still possessed. For so long, I'd been the woman people overlooked, the helper, the background figure, the one who'd grown old and quiet. But not tonight. Tonight, I was someone else. I was the storm no one saw coming. Carol came by on a Thursday afternoon, pretending it was just a friendly visit. She brought a small box of muffins and that same calm, knowing look she used to have back at the hospital. We sat at the kitchen table, the children playing quietly in the next room, and I could tell before she said a word. She saw it too. The weight, the exhaustion in their movements, the kind of emotional bruises that don't show on skin. She didn't need to confirm my fears, but when she did, it wasn't with alarm. It was with quiet resolve. That steadiness gave me courage. From that day forward, I began to record everything. I wrote down what they ate, how often they woke up from nightmares, how long it took before they smiled without looking over their shoulders. I took discreet photos of bruises that faded too slowly, of shoes that didn't fit, of clothes that had been washed until they were threadbare. It felt wrong, in a way, gathering proof instead of simply loving them. But I understood now that love sometimes needs evidence. Each evening, after the dishes were done and the house settled into its quiet rhythm, I would sit at my desk and write. The click of my pen, the rustle of paper, it became a ritual of both heartbreak and hope. Some nights I cried. Other nights I prayed. Every note I wrote was a promise that I would not let this truth be buried. But even in the midst of that heaviness, the house began to change. My granddaughter started humming while brushing her hair. My grandson began asking questions about the stars. Their laughter, the small, tentative kind at first, began to fill corners of the house I hadn't realized had gone silent. It was the sound of healing, fragile but growing. I saw it, and I documented that too. Not just the neglect, but the recovery. The proof that with love, they were becoming whole again. By the end of that week, I had a folder filled with photographs, notes, and memories that could no longer be dismissed. As I looked at it, heavy, undeniable, a calmness washed over me. I was ready. I wasn't just a grandmother anymore. I was their witness, their advocate, their shield. Tomorrow would come, and with it, the confrontation I'd been preparing for. But tonight, as I checked on the children one last time, I felt peace. The truth was finally on our side. The morning they were supposed to come back, the air felt unnaturally still. I'd been awake since dawn, moving slowly through the house, folding blankets, setting out the children's backpacks, and checking my notes one last time. Every motion carried weight. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Just steady, like someone standing on solid ground after a long storm. The evidence sat neatly on the table: photos, written logs, records, proof of what I'd seen, of what they'd done. By the time the car pulled into the driveway, my heart was calm. I could hear the muffled music from the radio before the engine even stopped. Cheerful, careless. When Melissa stepped out, her hair perfectly styled, sunglasses perched on her head, she looked lighter, freer, as if the last week had been a vacation. My son followed behind her, shoulders slouched, phone in hand, his eyes avoiding mine. That avoidance told me everything. They came inside with smiles that didn't reach their eyes, asking how things had gone, pretending concern. But I saw the flicker of irritation beneath their practiced tones. They hadn't expected to find me standing tall, the house spotless, the children healthy and laughing in the other room. I let them talk. I let the silence stretch. Then, when the moment felt right, I set the folder on the table. I remember my voice was soft when I told them I had kept records, that I had noticed the bruises, the hunger, the fear. I explained, simply, that I couldn't ignore it anymore. Melissa's face changed first, her mouth tightening, denial spilling into excuses. My son's expression faltered, confusion first, then guilt, then shame. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Before their words could tangle into justifications, there was a knock at the door. Carol stepped in, calm and composed, holding her own set of documents. Her presence changed the air entirely. Melissa froze, realizing this was no family scolding. This was accountability. The next few minutes passed like slow motion. I spoke with precision, just as I had in hospital briefings years ago. I explained the photos, the timeline, the reports Carol had verified. There was no yelling, no dramatic gestures, only the quiet authority of truth. The louder they protested, the steadier I became. I could see in their eyes that the illusion was crumbling. When it was done, the children came to my side instinctively, and I placed a hand on each of their shoulders. I didn't feel victorious, only sad and certain. Melissa turned away, furious and humiliated. My son couldn't meet my gaze, but I didn't need their acknowledgement. I had done what needed to be done. As their car disappeared down the road, the house fell silent again. I stood by the window, watching the afternoon light stretch across the yard. My heart hurt, but it was the kind of ache that comes with clarity. I whispered a quiet promise to the children resting behind me, that this was only the beginning. Tomorrow, there would be calls, reports, hearings. A reckoning was coming, not out of vengeance, but out of love. The courtroom was colder than I expected. The air felt heavy, the kind that makes every sound echo a little longer. Papers shuffled, heels clicked against the polished floor, and the low murmur of voices rose and fell like the tide. I sat quietly in the second row, hands folded in my lap, my folder of evidence resting beside me. A simple manila envelope holding months of truth. When the hearing began, I kept my eyes on the children. They sat with a guardian near the front, too small for chairs that big. My grandson's feet didn't touch the floor. He swung them gently, unaware of the tension that gripped the adults around him. My granddaughter clutched a small, stuffed bear I'd tucked into her backpack that morning. Seeing them there, clean, cared for, safe, steadied me more than anything else could. As my documentation was presented, I felt time slow down. The photos, the notes, the reports I'd written by lamplight, each piece laid bare what had been hidden behind closed doors. I didn't look at Melissa or my son when the images appeared on the screen. I just listened. The words of the social worker, the clinical tone of the report, the quiet gasp that escaped someone in the room. It wasn't vengeance I felt. It was gravity. Truth has a sound, and it filled that space like a bell. I could sense their defenses collapsing. Melissa's posture stiffened, her face a mask of disbelief and wounded pride. My son's eyes were wet, fixed on the table in front of him. I wished, for a moment, that things had been different, that they'd chosen love over pride before it came to this, but wishing couldn't change what was already done. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my words brief and steady. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I simply told the truth, that no child deserves to live in fear, that silence is complicity, and that love means protecting even when it hurts. When the judge finally spoke, his tone was measured, decisive. Each word landed like a weight lifting. The ruling came, and with it, a sense of finality. The children would remain in my care for now. The system would move forward. Healing, accountability, safety, all written into law, at least for this moment. As I left the courtroom, I paused at the doorway. The light from the tall windows poured across the floor, warm and soft, reaching even the farthest corners of the room. I took a slow breath, letting it fill me. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was peace, a quiet, trembling peace that had been a long time coming. Outside, the wind carried the sound of children laughing somewhere down the hall. I followed that sound, one careful step at a time, knowing the hardest part was over and the most important part, the healing, was about to begin. The morning after the hearing, the house was quiet in a way I hadn't known in years. Not heavy, not fearful, just calm. The kind of silence that lets you hear the hum of the refrigerator, the soft ticking of the wall clock, the gentle breath of sleeping children in the next room. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to brace myself for anything. The storm had passed. As the sun began to rise, light poured through the kitchen window, warm and golden, landing across the counter where the children's breakfast plates sat waiting. I could smell the faint sweetness of pancakes cooking on the skillet, hear the creak of the old floorboards as small feet padded toward me. My granddaughter's hair was still a tangle from sleep, and my grandson rubbed his eyes, yawning as he climbed onto his chair. Ordinary moments, but to me, they felt like miracles. The laughter came back slowly. At first, it was small, a giggle during a game, a soft hum while drawing. Then, day by day, it filled the rooms again. The house that once felt sterile and dim after my surgery now pulsed with life. Toys scattered under tables, socks lost behind couches, the rhythm of a home rediscovered. Sometimes, when the children played in the yard, I would sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching them chase bubbles through the morning air. Their joy healed me more than any medicine ever could. And in that peace, I found myself thinking not about anger or justice anymore, but about grace. I couldn't forgive what had happened. Not yet. But I could forgive the part of myself that had stayed silent too long. I could let go of the bitterness that kept me tied to pain. Healing, I learned, isn't about forgetting. It's about living without fear, about believing that love can still grow in the soil of broken things. By the time spring came, the garden I'd neglected for months was blooming again. The children helped me plant marigolds along the fence, their hands dirty, their laughter bright. As we worked, I looked around. The sunlight, the flowers, the sound of life returning, and felt something inside me settle. We weren't the same family we used to be. Maybe we never would be. But we were whole, in our own quiet way. And in that moment, watching the children run barefoot through the grass, I realized that peace doesn't always come with endings. Sometimes, it begins again in the smallest moments of joy. It's strange how quiet the house feels now. Not empty, just peaceful. The kind of quiet that carries laughter instead of loneliness. Sometimes, when the sun sets through the kitchen window, I find myself thinking about how far we've come. How life doesn't always give us perfect endings, only honest ones. And maybe that's enough. There was a time when I thought strength meant enduring, keeping the peace no matter the cost. But now I understand, real strength is choosing love even when it demands courage. It's standing up when silence would be easier. It's opening your heart again after it's been broken. What happened changed us. It tested every part of who I thought I was. But through it all, I found something steady inside. A love that doesn't disappear when life gets cruel. That love carried me through the fear, the guilt, the doubt. And it reminded me that protecting the ones we love isn't an act of rebellion. It's an act of grace. Forgiveness came slowly, not the kind that erases what was done, but the kind that frees you from the weight of it. I learned that letting go isn't weakness, it's how we make room for peace. I still think of my son sometimes, the boy he was, the father he wanted to be. I don't know if we'll ever find our way back, but I still wish him healing, because that's what love does. It hopes, even when it hurts. Now, every morning feels like a new beginning. The children's laughter fills the hallways again. Sunlight spills across the floor, and the world feels just a little softer. Maybe that's all any of us can hope for, to find warmth again after the cold, to build a family not out of perfection, but out of care. If you're listening to this and you've ever faced a moment that tested your courage, I hope you remember this. Love is worth the risk. Speak up. Stand firm. Protect what's good in this world. And when you're ready, share your story. I'd love to hear it. Because every time one of us finds the courage to choose love over fear, the world becomes just a little bit kinder.